Everyone, it's good to be with you all. You guys are in Genesis. That is the class of the auditorium. This is the schedule. Nope. Yep. Okay. Never mind. So I will be teaching every class this quarter, so I should be with you the entire quarter. Like I said, my last mission report, I don't plan on going on another trip like that for this quarter, and so I should be able to be here for every single class. So I'm excited. Genesis is one of my favorite books of the Bible. If you're allowed to have favorites, this is one of mine. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. So I'm excited to go through it with you all and to explore these ideas, to maybe talk about some things that maybe you're familiar with, and maybe explore concepts or ideas that aren't as familiar. And so this is the outline of Genesis. So normally I don't spend too much time on this, but this is a pretty clear-cut outline of the book. So the first 11 chapters 1 through 11, they deal with 4 events. So you have these 4 events that happen. You have creation, you have the fall of man, you have the flood, and you have the Tower of Babel. Those are the 4 events. And then later on in the class, we'll deal with the 4 people, the 4 patriarchs. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and that's from chapters 12 to 50. A good way of thinking about these 2 sections within Genesis is to think of the first 11 chapters as the history of mankind. It's trying to answer the big questions about life, the big questions about why are things the way they are? Why is civilization the way it is? Why are people the way it is? Why is the world the way it is? How did the world even come about? And so those are the questions being answered in the former. In the latter, you have questions about the Israelite people. And why that's important? Well, we're spiritual Israel. We are now the people of God that have been adopted. If we have the faith of Abraham, we are a part of Israel. And so this is our history, and that's why it matters to us. And that's why we should learn these things. Ultimately, this also points towards Jesus. We'll talk about that in Genesis 12. There's these promises, and even prophecies before that we'll talk about next week, that show Jesus constantly throughout Genesis. There's shadows of him and the work that he's trying to accomplish. And so that's the class. These are some lenses that I want to look at the class through. So if you picked up material from last week for today, you saw this at the top of your sheet. I'm probably not going to read the sections while we're in here. Maybe some verses, but we won't have time because we're going through 50 chapters in 13 weeks. We won't have time to go through all those chapters and read everything. So I'm going to kind of assume you've read for the next week and kind of talk about it in that way. So please read ahead. Please grab material. Material for next week is in the back that you can go over. There's questions to kind of guide you along and these lenses to look through. One of the important things that I want to point out here is that top line. The audience of this book, there's different ideas of who exactly wrote the book and exactly when it was written. There's a general consensus that Moses was either a major contributor or the author of the book. And so you have Moses at least heavily influencing this book, and it's a compilation of all these things put together. Couple things. The audience, it's the Israelites, but whatever time period that is in, is being heavily influenced by the culture around them. It's a polytheistic culture of believing different gods, whether that's the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Babylonians. You have these cultures that are around these people that are saying different things. And one of the purposes of this book, especially what we're going to go through today, is to show how God is different than the culture around them. The culture around you says that religion and your gods function like this, view mankind as this. Our God is different. The God of Israel is set apart. He's holy. He's special. And so we're going to explore some of that today. The last thing I also want to point out is this bottom line. I want to point out the shadows of Christ and the work that he helps us, the work that he came to accomplish as we go through Genesis. Some of you know this. I don't think a lot of you know this, but I had a real struggle with my faith personally at the end of high school and trying to find and understand that for myself and personally as I went into college. And one of the things that helped me the most, if not the thing that helped me the most, was the idea of typology or parallelism or shadowing, was seeing that these things are all connected. Seeing that it's not just like these sporadic stories that like have nothing to do with each other at all, but seeing that the Bible story is one story. And seeing like Genesis showing Jesus. And this book specifically was really helpful in me building my faith personally. And so I want to highlight those things as we go through this. Okay, to get into the outline of today's class, this is how I want to go about these classes and approach them, is generally speaking with 2 questions, maybe 3, if there's a class like that, crazy, 3 questions. But in like questions of what is this trying to say to us? How maybe can we learn lessons from this that are bigger picture questions? And so the first one of today is, how does the structure of Genesis 1 show unique characteristics of God? And then the second, what does Genesis 1 teach me about my created purpose as a human being? And so how can we see this in the structure of it and learn about God? And then also, what is this saying about who I am? So what do I mean by that first question? Well, here's an example of that. So Genesis 1 does this really beautiful thing. It's a really cool thing. Look at verse 2. Well, let's start in verse 1. Why not? Verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Okay, there's different things that you could say about these 2 verses. So much is packed in there. But I want you to notice this phrase, without form and void. The idea, to my understanding behind the Hebrew there, is this idea of like a desert. It's literally wild and waste. It's just this chaos, and nothing's really structured. And then God comes into the picture. And he does this. And he creates these days, and he creates them with a purpose. So, the problem here is it's without form and void. Well, he gives it form, and he fills the void. And so he has, in the first day, heavens and earth, and then second day, waters above and below. That's what it's supposed to say. Third day, dry land and vegetation. And so it's giving an environment for things that get filled. So if you see like the horizontal connections here, that the heavens and earth, they get filled with lights by the sun, moon, and stars. And the second day, the waters above and the waters below get filled with birds of the sky and sea creatures. And then the dry land gets filled with animals, and it gets filled with humans. And so the question I have for you guys is how does the pattern of forming and filling reflect God's intentionality and order in creation? Like, what is this saying about the character of God that he was able to do this, or that he was functioning or building in this way? LR, can you say that again?
Extreme organization.
Organization. And so you have, it's not just like we're kind of going to try to put this together and I don't really know what I'm doing. Keep going, LR. Yeah.
Okay, when he says let there be light, this word light is like the electromagnetic spectrum.
Okay.
It's energy, it's radiation, and it has frequencies to it. And this includes the frequencies we broadcast TV and cell phone signals and all this. That's created. Now man doesn't know how to use it yet, but God creates all this energy, which we will later manipulate ourselves as humans learn and start developing microwaves. All this is in this light. This is energy. And the universe uses this energy to keep plants, to make plants grow, or whatever we need. Right there is a key thing, and he sees the need of it before he makes the physical source. He sees we have to have that. And it shows so much organization, and he knows mankind needs it.
Good. What else? I heard another voice. I don't know who it came from. Consistency. And so there seems to be a way in which God is functioning. It's not this random thing. It's very organized. Good. What else?
Well, there's purpose to the things he's doing. As you alluded to, it's not random. It's structured and it has purpose.
Yes. It does. It has a purpose. God is very logical in how he is working. This idea that's even deeper, I think that everyone's touching on here, is you have this chaos, and then God comes in the picture and he makes order. Like all this was from a place of chaos. You could even elaborate that and spiritualize it and put ourselves into it, that we have chaos within our lives. God comes into our lives. He is able to make order because that's the God that we serve. He can do it with creation, and he can do it with us. As we keep going, we're going to see some repetitions. So if you read through Genesis 1, there's going to be these phrases that kind of jump out at you. And they're trying to be like, hey, like notice this pattern. Notice this thing that keeps being said over and over and over again. And so I'm going to point out a couple of those. What I'd like to do, for example, is say, okay, you see God said. I think that's 10 times if I counted that right. So you see God said, and you see this over and over and over again. Like verse 3, and God said, let there be light. Verse 6, and God said, let there be an expanse. And it keeps going. What do you think the point of that is? Like, what do you think the deeper point of this repeated phrase is? I'll give you one example of what I mean. So I think one of the points here is that God's words are powerful. If God says, let something happen, guess what? It happens. It's authoritative, and it brings life. God's words are able to say something, able to say, let there be light, and light happens. If I go into, out there and there's no light and I say, let there be light, nothing happens because I'm not God. I can't do that. My words don't carry the same weight. Do you guys think of anything else or any other reasons that this phrase would be repeated? It's important? Is that what you said? You want to expand on that a little bit?
Anything that's repeated tends to be important, and I think it's important for us to understand that God has the control. God has the power. Therefore, God said this, and it happened. I just don't think sometimes we take the gravity of that into its full effect.
Yes, and I think this relates. So if I believe that God can say a phrase like let there be light, or for the waters to separate, and there now be clouds and there be sea. If I believe God and his words are that powerful, how am I going to look at this? Am I going to just look at this something that I casually approach? Or am I going to look at this as, this is the words of God. This is powerful. This is important. This is something I'm going to approach as that can bring me life. Good. Do you have your hand raised, Ellar?
Yeah, he's establishing his authority, but remember he told Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? He's showing his authority, and it only comes from him, and he's the witness. Where were you when I laid this? Well, he's the witness. He is a true source.
Yeah, we are not like this. God is set apart in his ability to this and to create. This is one of the things when Jesus comes on the scene, that he's acting and having attributes that only God does and that set God apart. That Jesus is able to control nature, and he's able to still the waters when there's these great storms. Only God can do that in the Old Testament. And so Jesus is God. He's able to do those things. Really good. Here are a couple others. He communicates his will to bring life. So God could have done this in any way. God could have created earth in any way that he decided, and he decided to do it through words. And I think in passing, this doesn't really come to mind that much. But at the same time, think about this. He's communicating, and then it's happening. And so the same way he operates with us is he communicates his will to us, and that brings life to us. He operates with his creation in this way, and he's building a pattern of a relationship. Yeah, sure. Of being relational and who he is. Last one. One God created and is over all. So it doesn't say X God says this, Y God says this, Z God says this, and it's not all these separate gods creating these other things. So for a polytheistic audience, this would be like a big deal, because in some of these creation accounts, specifically Babylon's, it's a battle between the gods. That the world is created through a battle, and the world is created through each of these gods taking dominion over certain things. This person's over the fresh water, this person's over the still water, this person's over this and that. Same thing with the Egyptians. They have gods of certain things in creation. God of Israel is not like that. Like the God of creation, the creator, doesn't work in that way. Instead, he creates everything and he is over everything. And so I think it's trying to make that distinction for those people as well. What about this? According to its kind. So we see this phrase repeated 4 times. According to its kind. What do you think this is trying to say about God, or about the way that he functions or works, or about creation itself?
Everything has an order to it.
Yes. This isn't an accident. So it's not like things just popped up. So the Egyptians, their creation account, it's really weird. Their main god, like, spits and then, like, creates 2 other gods, and then, like, they function together and they create 2 other gods, and it's this, like, kind of compounding effect that's, like, really just random. There's, like, I think an African religion where the god, like, throws up the world. And this is like the mindset we had to be thinking in. This is trying to set our God aside. Creation is made with order. It's not an accident. It's not something that just popped out of nowhere. I'm going to say this one as well. That there's distinct roles and boundaries made with these things. When God makes his creation, he makes it and he kind of puts limits on how things function. He puts limits on the sea. He puts limits on where things go, how they operate, how they function. God is in charge of ordering those and putting those boundaries and giving those specific things the roles that they have. Does anyone else have any other thoughts besides those 2? Travis?
What I always think about in this section is that God is not satisfied with a small amount of life. He creates life to be self-perpetuating. And you see words like teem, and swarm, and fill, and multiply. That God wants abundant life, to be again self-perpetuating and growing. And we continue to see that even in the New Testament with the parable of the banquet. He wants his house to be filled. And for me, taking that and applying it to how the church operates today, that we should never be satisfied because God is never satisfied with just a few souls saved here and there. He wants it filled. And that's been the order from the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. And so we'll see this in man's purpose, but I think it's good that you're bringing up now that this is a pattern we see started before with the filling, with the order, with roles and distinctions. This is something that God uses for all of his creation and even brings man into where he wants them to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, things like that. One more. God saw it was good. So this is a phrase that's repeated 7 times within this first chapter. So a perfect's a complete number. Some other things to point out, there's 7 days. We'll make a comment on that, hopefully at the end of class. And then the word for God is used 35 times, which is 5 sets of 7, or 7 sets of 5, whatever way you want to do it. And so there's this idea of this 7 number just being completely throughout this text. So what do you think some points about creation or about God that are to be understood through this phrase? God saw it was good.
Well, he did that every time except after he made woman.
Okay, what else? Hello?
Well, like you said earlier, everything has a role. The animals have a role, people, I mean, we all have roles. And there's an order to these things. And it's to teach us how to do things properly. Everything should be done in a proper fashion. And God is the author of organization. And our mankind wants to take things and mix it up and change it and do things with it it's not supposed to be, as we see outside these 4 walls. Here we see God had a purpose for man and woman. He had a purpose for the animals, and we should stay with that.
Good. Travis?
Everything is good until sin enters the picture. Nothing has been corrupted yet.
That's a really big point. So next week we'll talk about this question: what's wrong with the world? Like, why is the world the way it is? And we see here the problem is not creation itself. It's not what God has done. God has pronounced creation as good. So we can say that isn't the problem. Good. Did you have something to say?
God is the one that decides what is good because He is good. He's the source of good. He provides the goodness to everybody. So He declares what is good because He is good. He is that source. And when I see that idea that God saw that it was good, it's almost like how we would phrase it in our vernacular. It's like a chef's kiss. Like when you have something that tastes so good and is so delicious and so amazing, you've created it. You are enraptured with that thing or whatever you may create as an artist or a cook or whatever it may be. Very similarly, God is the same.
Yes, absolutely. Beautifully said. I'm not going to try to expound too much on that. I do want to point out, I'm probably going to bring this out next week as well. Look at chapter 3, verse 6. So we're skipping ahead a little bit, not really what we're focusing on today. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was the delight of her eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make them wise, she took of its fruit, ate it, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, he ate. And so we see when man or woman tries to define these things for themselves, what's good and bad. God said, this is good, and then he later on in chapter 2 says, hey, this is a provision, this is a protection I put on you, don't do this. And man goes beyond that, and they try to define good for themselves. That brings in a lot of problems. But God is able to do this and do it well. Was there another hand over here? Okay, cool. That was my first point. The physical world is not the problem. Sometimes we talk and have this vocabulary where it is. God states the physical world is good. We have to understand things like God understands them and how God says they are. And so this is not the problem of the world, the creation itself. Second, I think we've already commented on both of those. We'll keep going. So this is where I want to get to the second question, this question of what does this passage teach us about us and our created purpose? And so if you remember that chart from the beginning of class, you have all these things. The sixth day, man is created. Man is created. And so the first thing that I want to point out here is creation kind of builds up to this point where man is the climax of the story. It's like crescendo if you're a music person, where it's like building up and then it's like there. But I want to point out at the same time, although we are the climax of creation and God's prized possession of his creation, we are not the main character. So I mentioned this a little earlier in class. The generic term for God, Elohim, is used 35 times within this creation account. So it's just really pounding it into your, it's like God, 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 God does this, God says this, God created this, and it's just emphasizing this. And as we approach the Bible, and this first book of the Bible, we need to understand that we aren't the main character of the story. Man isn't the main character of the story. And sometimes we read our Bible through that lens, that what I'm reading is about me. And there's a lot, obviously, that we can take away from what we read and put it into our lives. There's a lot to be said about what we gain and benefit and how the Bible relates to us. But at the end of the day, God is the main character. And this is about his redemptive plan and his story that we are taking part in. And he's a beautiful God, and he's an amazing God. And it's a blessing that we're able to be a part of that story. But we can't lose track of this. Even though we are the climax and that we're like an amazing part of God's creation, we're not the main character. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any comments or questions about that specifically?
Any degree to which we are amazing is no more or less than a direct reflection on the amazingness of the author. So there's no point in getting prideful about how great we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we do that. We do that. I think you put it very well. This idea also shows that creation is for us in a big way. And so if you think about the days before day 6 and what's occurring and what's happening, you can think about it in the sense of it's happening for man and for this pivotal point of this creation arc. And so land is being created for us to live on, and you have food being created for us to eat, and you have the stars, the sun, moon, and stars created for us to be able to have ways of keeping track of time and other things as well that those things function as. And so you see creation is all being in aid of man and our function here. On top of this, we're given some roles. And so let's look at this. We're given some generic roles together in verse 28. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every little thing that moves on the earth." So we're supposed to have dominion, and we're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. This is some of our first intended purposes that are generic and for all of us. And so part of this is having dominion. What exactly does that mean? I probably don't understand every detail of what that phrase means, but I do understand, I think, pretty properly, that God is sharing in his authority. So think about a boss that you have, or maybe that you're aware of, or a situation you're aware of, that is really insecure about their position. That boss isn't probably going to share that much authority with you. If he feels like you are a threat to him at all, he isn't going to say, "Hey, let me give you this that will build you up," because he's afraid of being overtaken in his position. God doesn't work like that. God's not afraid of sharing in his authority with us. Who's the ultimate authority? God. Who's able to say something happened and it happens? God is. We're not able to do that. But he does share in his authority with us, and he wants to partner with us, which is an overall theme, I think, of the Bible. God wants to partner with us. This doesn't make us equals. We don't have the same level of authority. We're not the same. But God does see a value in us that he wants to lift us up from our positioning. And he's so powerful, he doesn't feel threatened by this idea of lifting us up. And then this idea of being fruitful and multiply. Again, we're seeing this pattern of this thing that needs to be filled. And so there's the land. We are a part of filling that and filling creation. And this is going to be extended into this next idea I want to talk about of being an image bearer of God. That when we are filling the earth, what we're supposed to be filling the earth with is the images of God. What exactly does that mean? What does it mean to be an image bearer of God? I have my phone. Great, awesome. So I have this picture here from when I was in Africa, right? It's me and one of the guys I was with. His name's Josh. Josh is great. I love Josh. Josh is here, and this is an image of him. Is this Josh? No. But is this a representation of Josh? Yes. Is this a place Josh can be seen? Yes. He's even drinking a coconut. Josh really likes coconuts. So it's even a place where something about Josh can be known. So in a similar way, we are image bearers of God. We are not God, but we are a place that God can be seen and aspects of him can be known. And so maybe that's helpful in thinking about this equation. Biblically, at the same time, this phrase image, to be an image of something, is used elsewhere in the Bible to talk about idols and images of false gods that are put in temples. And you see, I put examples at the bottom there of other times it's used. I took this one from 1 Kings. Then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and tore it down. His altar and his images they broke into pieces. And so we see the same word in Hebrew is used for this idea of an idol or an image that's put in the temple. The garden is this beautiful place, and maybe we'll touch on this next week, maybe we won't, that is really representative of what the temple was pointing back, I guess, and pointing in a way forward to, of this place where God and man dwelled together, and this dwelling place of God. It was, in the most intimate way, the realest temple of God there has been. And so God placed his image within that temple in the proper way. And what idols are is a mar of this and an incorrect way of doing this. There's also some things to be said about some other religions going on in this region. So back to Babylon, those guys. So Babylon, in their creation story, it's this giant battle. It's kind of wild. And all these gods are mad at each other. There's this guy who kind of convinces the other gods, his name's Marduk, to get power. And Marduk goes and fights this other chaotic god, and he wins from all this power and all these weapons that he was able to get. And in this story, it's this giant epic about these gods and this battle. And then like man comes in the picture, and they're kind of like this afterthought. And they're not really something that's that important or climactic about the story. And the reason they're created is to serve and sustain the gods. And they're like these like little minions. And you build us temples, and you bring us food. And they're not given any value at all. But yet in this story, in the story that we believe in our God, the Creator, our God gives us value. And he gives us the highest value of being his representation, of being his image, of being him where he can be seen and known, placed in this earth. And I pointed out here, there's different aspects of this, right? So as Christians, we are being made into the image of God. And so there's something that's spiritual about this. That this is something that I strive towards and I want to achieve. This is something that I'm trying to get better at. Right now, because of the consequences of sin, which we'll talk about next week, there's parts of me that are marred and not the way they should be, that are failing at this endeavor. I'm not imaging God like I need to. I'm not representing him like I need to. I'm not being a place he can be seen and known like I need to be. And so I strive towards that, to be better at that. But that's not exclusively what this is about. Because there's ways, in Genesis 9:6 it talks about this, and in James 3:9, of how we are all as human beings images of God. And so there's an inherent value that we all have and that we all share and through being the image of God. And so why does it matter how I treat the people around me? Man, I think I answered this question. Sorry, guys. Why does it matter why I treat the image? Wait, I think this is I'm just going to ask the question. You guys answer. How does being created as the image bearer of God shape how we view ourselves and others? What do you guys think?
Well, it puts a lot of value on us as human beings. It puts a lot of value on human beings that we associate with. And so we should honor them and respect them in the ways in which God intended man to live in harmony with him and with his people. And, Jesus was the embodiment of that great image bearer of God. And how he associated with human beings is the model of the greatest image bearer of God, because he was God. And so when we see his example, we follow, as First Peter suggests, in his steps to make sure that we are following that image. And I love the narrative in Genesis 1, how it talks about let there be, let these waters come out. And then right when it talks about mankind, which is all of us in this room this evening, it says, let us make. So like there is a creative purpose in each and every one of us, where God, in the triune, I don't know how he did it, created so much more in us to be like him and to make us after him, which is his kind, which is very similar to how the narrative was, making all these kinds and making order, and he's making us after his kind.
Mm-hmm.
That's wacko. I mean, that's crazy to think about. That we may think of ourselves as such an insignificant speck, but like if you think of it that way, you are so much more than what you think you are. And these people that are so much more than you think they are.
Absolutely. I don't want to, before, I want to let, does anyone have any comments? Any other thoughts?
I think this is an interesting comparison between other religions, like you mentioned in the Babylonian epic, and then also in like the Greek and Roman gods, where people are not necessarily made in the images of the gods. More the gods take on the image of people, where they have a lot of human emotions, and is not the image of the god. So.
Absolutely. Where it's almost like they're very permissive, Well, I'm just acting like my gods do. And ours is a call to be more, act like your God does. And that's a striving that we have towards. Someone was pointing towards this direction, was that right? Anyone? LR, do you have some thoughts?
I was thinking on authority, we, in England, the police have the authority to rescue the name of the crown. Are they the crown? No. They have the authority of the crown. We're likewise. We are not God, but we have authority from God. When we sin, we break that authority, we tarnish that authority. But when Christ died and we pray in Jesus' name, we're praying by the authority that Jesus gave us. And we're doing that. We're using that authority and we're establishing that relationship again. What a wonderful thing that He has given us to have that authority.
Amen. So, what I want to bring out here, and I think you guys have said some beautiful things that have really added to this discussion, is this idea of interconnection to each other, understanding a real big aspect of what sin is this idea of, for some reason in my head, instead of thinking that I'm an image bearer of God and you are an image bearer of God, and so in God's view, we have equal value, and there's things that people do to lift themselves up and give themselves more value and see themselves in a way that's higher than someone else and not honoring how someone else is also the image bearer of God. And so if we see people like God sees people that have value and that should be treated a certain way, because we're all image bearers of God, no matter what distinctions or what separations, we all share in that. It gives us this idea that if we approach it in the proper way, it prevents sin. If we ignore it, it is the cause of sin. And so, like anger, I talked about in my sermon the other day. This idea that I think that my time or my convenience or something about me is worth more than yours. And so I have the right to treat you however I want because some reason I've elevated my value and lowered yours. And so if we have this mindset, this proper mindset of what it means to be image bearers of God, and that we are all image bearers of God, it helps us to treat each other better. Notice here also that God makes man and female both in His image. He creates both of them in His image. So this isn't something that's distinct about man. It's not distinct about women. It's something they both have. And so next week we're going to enter into the conversation that I'd love for you guys to be a part of gender roles and maybe some of the distinctions that different genders do have. But this is not one of them. One of them is not the value that we have. The value we have before God is the same. This last idea, Matt mentioned it. I'm going to expand on it a little bit. This idea of let us make, I just want to read from, I don't think it's even out right on the slide. Let us make man in our image. That's what I was going for. Let us make man in our image. In verse 26. I don't know Hebrew, but let me explain some things that I currently understand about this. I called my Hebrew friend. It was fun. So then God, and the word for God there is Elohim. This idea of Elohim is not the word Yahweh. So Yahweh, we'll see in this next chapter, is the specific name that God gives Himself. I am who I am. We see that in Exodus 3 when He's at the burning bush with Moses. This word is Elohim, which is more of a generic term for deity or God. We see it sometimes used in a plural sense. So one of the examples of that is in the Ten Commandments. In Exodus 20, verse 3, we see this, and it says, have no other gods before me. And so that word there is Elohim. Have no other Elohim before me. This isn't always talking about God, Yahweh. Here it is. So one of the things that sets this apart with God, the God of Israel versus other Elohim, is that when Elohim is used when referring to the God of Israel, the verbs associated with it, so if that's the noun, the verbs associated with it are singular. So even though the noun is plural, the verbs are singular, emphasizing the oneness of the God of Israel, this Elohim. It's okay if you didn't get that, but if you did, I hope it was cool. So when it says this in verse 26, it says, then God, which is the plural, but said is a singular verb, let us make man in our image. That's plural. Our image. The English is correct there. And so what is this saying? That there's two main thoughts of what this our image means. I'll say the one that maybe isn't as common, or in Christian circles. So, and I don't want to get into a rabbit trail here, but in the Bible, you see it in Job. There seems to be some sort of divine counsel, heavenly counsel that pops up throughout the Old Testament narrative. That's around God, and Job is probably the clearest depiction of that. And so a thought could be, because those are also referred to as Elohim, this idea that he's asking his counsel. More popular in like Christian tradition is reading the Trinity into this text and reading this as God referring to Jesus and referring to the Spirit, because the Spirit we saw back in verse 2 that he hovers over the waters, he makes the chaotic waters into still waters. And then we see from John 1 that Jesus is very active in creation. And so those are two ideas. I hope that didn't bore you too much. But those are two ideas here of what this phraseology of let us make a man in our image could be. Is that it could be this divine counsel that God is opening up to and deciding with, or it could be the Trinity and talking about that exclusively. At the end of the day, in verse 27, it is God who creates man. This is something that only God can do. Angels, divine counsels, they cannot create. God can create. God can do this. And so God is set aside and set apart in his ability to do this. And at the end of the day, it's what is emphasized and matters. But for probably some of you in this room, that was good and interesting and added. Others, I'm glad that you were patient. Okay, so the final thing I want to talk about is the idea of Sabbath rest. Awesome. So what is our creative purpose? We've talked about how we're the climax of creation, to have dominion, be fruitful, multiply, image bearer of God, to be a representation of him. This is something that we are as human beings, but also something we strive towards as a spiritual reality, and that Jesus is the perfect of. Sabbath rest. This becomes a model for the people. That one of the reasons that the people do the Sabbath, there's two given in the Old Testament. One of them is that God does it in creation on the seventh day. And so people align themselves with this Sabbath rest. But the interesting thing about the seventh day is that it's called holy. It's called set apart. This is the first time in the Bible that the word holy is used. And this day is set apart because it has no evening, it has no morning. There's probably other ways it's set apart, but that's at least one of them. And so it breaks the pattern of the previous 6 days. At the end of each of those 6 days, there was evening, there was morning, and the day ceased. But this day of rest has no end. And so there could be a theological point to be made here that God's intended purpose for creation was rest, and giving rest to his people, and wanting to provide them rest. We see this ultimately in Jesus. Jesus comes and he lifts the burdens of people. He takes that away from them. He gives them rest. All who are heavy laden, I will give you rest. And so we see Jesus, he comes, he is the true Sabbath, the Sabbath that gives us rest from our sins. Ultimately, we still await a future Sabbath of heaven. So we have a partial or even the whole but not actualized yet would probably be a better way of saying that in Jesus and our relationship with him of this rest. But we will one day, when Jesus returns, have this ultimate rest and this ultimate Sabbath, this thing that God always intended for. The idea of the Bible and this this idea of the Bible, the story of the Bible, starts and ends in the garden. If you look at the end of Revelation, you'll see garden imagery just screaming at you. And so God wants us to end back here. He wants it to end how he started. and his intended purpose, where everything is good, where he is dwelling within. We'll see that next week, and where there's ultimate rest. I appreciate you guys a lot. Yeah, we'll just skip through that. I appreciate you guys a lot. And that's the bell. So next week, materials in the back. We'll go through 2 questions we're going to be asking is the gender roles, what makes us distinct in our creative purpose, and the second one, what's wrong with the earth. Thank you.